Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we're going to dive deep into the evolving world of agriculture, focusing on some of the critical shifts from a traditional farm management to the broader, more comprehensive perspectives of agribusiness. There's a bit of a transition there. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Joining me today is a special guest from the University of Guelph, an institution that many of our listeners and viewers are very familiar with, especially if you're alumni. Our guest brings a wealth of knowledge and experience serving as a professor of agricultural economics at the Ontario Agricultural College and currently taking on the role of acting dean of OAC. Their unique position offers a fresh, insightful perspective on the agricultural sector, encompassing research, classroom education, and extensive outreach activities. Our guest today is Dr. John Cranfield. As we navigate today's conversation, we're going to explore the significance of language in our industry. The editor of RealAgriculture.com, Lindsay Smith, she always reminds me, Shaun, words matter. This notion rings especially true in the context of agriculture, where all the time we're using terms that shape our understanding and approach to the business. Historically, the term farm management dominated many discussions. But in my conversations with John Cranfield, he hinted at a pivotal shift towards agribusiness. This change reflects the evolution of farming practices and the increasing recognition of farms as dynamic businesses. So let's delve into this important distinction and uncover some of the implications of those involved in the agricultural sector and more specifically in agricultural education. Hey, John, it's great to chat with you.
Fantastic to be here. I'm so happy that we had a chance to talk about this.
Yeah, so give us some of your background right now. What is your role at the University of Guelph right now?
Yeah, great question. So I'm a professor of agricultural economics in the Ontario Agricultural College. I've been here since 2001, and right now I'm serving as the acting dean of OAC. So I'm getting a very different perspective on all the different activities that happen in the college, from research to what we do in the classroom to outreach and our engagement with our alumni.
Cool stuff. Well, we have a lot of University of Guelph alumni that follow Real Agriculture very, very closely. So it's great to chat with you here today. So right off the top, now there's a lot of words are important. Our editor Lindsay Smith tells me that all the time. She's always reminding me words matter. Now, a lot of times we say farm management, but you and I were chatting off camera earlier about maybe we shouldn't say farm management. Maybe we should, and there's real purpose and intent here, we should talk more about agribusiness. Talk about that distinction.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction for us, partly because the nature of what happens on a farm has changed over time. And the contemporary version of what we think of as a farm really is, it's a business that is being run around agricultural production. And so let's think about how we call it that. And it's not that there's anything wrong with saying farm management, there isn't, but I think saying something like agribusiness management or agribusiness enterprise management is a much more fitting way of talking about the things that farm managers and farm owners have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, whether that is thinking about strategy, whether that's thinking about HR issues, whether that's thinking about how you manage your finances and manage risk, whether that's thinking about even farm succession planning. It's all really framed around making really wise and savvy business decisions to help allow your farm and your business to grow.
Yeah, and we think about running a farm, whether you're on staff or you're the owner operator, you could be a one-man band, or maybe you've got, a whole fleet of people, employees that are working for you. There's lots of challenges. There's no doubt about it. But sometimes I think we think a little bit too like that Agriculture is different. And I think honestly, a lot of times, a lot of our challenges in running a farm business are actually entrepreneur challenges. Like you could be running the family hardware store down the street in Guelph, and you're dealing with the same things as somebody that's out in Wellington County running a dairy farm. There's some differences, of course, but a lot of similarities.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's you're taking some inputs, you're doing something with those inputs, you're creating an output, you're buying some things, you're transforming those inputs, and then you're selling it. I mean, I don't want to get like too reductionist on it, but they are very, very similar types of management issues. That the difference with agriculture is you're dealing also with biological systems, and in a non-agricultural commercial setting, there's a lot of levers and a lot of things that you can control in terms of how fast you manufacture product, what you're selling, when you're selling it. In some extent, we can do the same thing in agriculture, but fundamentally, you're taking sunlight, soil, water, and feed ingredients, and you're either growing a plant or you're raising an animal, and you don't have as many levers on that as maybe someone outside of an agricultural sector. So, that creates all sorts of risks and challenges that start layering these different types of risks on top of one another, that it's not just the business risk that enterprise might face, but it's also the production risk, those things like you can't control, for instance, whether you're going to have a drought, or whether you're going to have, in Southern Ontario right now, it's a balmy -20 with the wind chill. You can't necessarily control what the temperatures are going to be like. And so making sure that you understand what those management challenges are that make agriculture, I would argue, a little bit different and a little bit special, but you're still fundamentally taking something that you're buying or you're making, converting that into something that you're trying to sell to someone who wants to buy it.
Yeah. Now, there was a time where we were trying to convince kids that wanted to come back to the farm to go to college or go to university. Well, and that's happening a lot now. Now, one thing we do see is a lot of kids are going into, agronomy, plant science, right? Because I'm fundamentally coming back to the farm because I like to grow stuff.
Yeah.
Or livestock science because I like taking care of cows or chickens or whatever the livestock is. Sheep, if that's your game too. Should more people be going into some sort of like management, commerce, business, finance, economics degrees? Because based on what your first answer, we talked about the words. We're doing a lot more of those things in today's farming business world.
Yeah, this is a case where I think having non-dual thinking is really helpful. And so non-dual thinking is this and that.
Okay.
And in our college, one of the things that we've been really hammering away on is trying to increase enrollment in all of our programs, whether it's in agriculture, environmental sciences, food-related programs, or the social science of agriculture. We know from some work that we did in the labor market it's a little bit old, but I think the number still stands up in 2017, that for every graduate from our college, there are 4 jobs, and we took out hourly wage paying jobs.
Yeah.
So these were that first career step. So that 4-to-1 number has only grown.
Wow.
And it's not because we haven't been able to keep up. Our enrollments have grown during this time, but the sector's growing so quick. And so we need this and that kind of thinking around. We need people going into agronomy, into crop science, into livestock, but we also need people going into the business side of it. And ideally, it's going to be people who are conversant in both sides of that equation, because they're going to be going into the business world, whether they want to admit that or not, or whether they're aware of that or not, that, for most of the people that graduate from our college, they're going to be going into the crop input sector. Some of them are going to go back to the farm. Some of them are going to be going into the food industry. And so in all of those circumstances, they got to have an understanding of sort of what are those technical things that make this process unique and special, but how do you manage that? And so to me, we need people who can do both. And what we've picked up from conversations with people who are hiring our graduates is that, they are looking for that. They're looking for that student who maybe took, in our college's case, an honors agriculture degree, but then shadowed an ag business program or took a minor in business, because they've now got the lingo. They've got a better understanding of what business decisions are like, but they also understand the technical side of the business. So, a good example might be someone going into the crop input sector and they're going into sales. they got to understand that sales bit. They got to understand a little bit of that business bit, the negotiation bit, sort of what goes on there. But they also have to be technically competent. They have to understand the product, the problem that product solves, and be able to speak to those issues when they're on that farm visit.
Well, there's another part of this too, is that, I think back to when I was in college, and you know what? Those are the best days of your life, whether you believe it or not at the time. Enjoy it while you're there, everybody. And if you've been there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But you don't really know at the time and this is maybe more true than ever, because people are changing careers like crazy and taking pivots and U-turns, and it's nuts. So you really don't know. And so when you are building that base of post-secondary education, don't trap yourself to be like, no, I know exactly what I'm going to be doing. And in some cases, yeah, like that may be the case. But I think more and more, like I took a finance degree. What I do on a daily basis I am so far away from that at this point, right? You think I've been in broadcasting or communications or, stuff like that. So there's something to be said about, be broad in your approach, have a focus, but be broad just in case, because you don't know where your career is going to take you.
That's right. And think about how that broadening that scope can open more doors for you both now and later. I mean, when we were chatting before we started recording, I shared, sort of my take on, what I think about universities and why people should come to universities. And yeah, there is the knowledge that you gain, the formal education that you get. But I also start asking the question, are you leaving better than you came? Have you become a better person, both at a personal level, but then also at a professional level? And do you have that self-awareness to understand, to know how you learn, that understanding and humility to say, you know what, sometimes I'm going to make some mistakes and that's going to be okay as long as I learn from those mistakes. And so I think a big part of that is, and again, this is this and that, is that you've got to have some of that formal training to help get those first couple of jobs, those first couple of career steps. But you've also got to have that development as a person so that you've got the confidence to go out and be curious about, well, what's, if someone's knocking on my door, an executive search firm's knocking on my door, and I'm kind of curious what's on that other side, so that you don't get trapped, that you've got that flexibility and that ability to navigate the randomness that sometimes comes with life of a position that something opens up. I came to Guelph because I wanted to be a wildlife veterinarian. And now I'm an agricultural economist and I'm the acting dean. I never imagined that I'd end up where I am today.
Yeah.
And I know I share that with students to really try to normalize that it's okay to think about doing something different. Don't get locked into it. Yeah. Think about, well, what might happen if I actually take a step sideways and then forward? Like, what does that start to look like?
We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. Maybe you've had an idea about upgrading your operation, or finally getting that renovation done, or buying some new equipment. Or you want to be a little less reliant on the weather from season to season. Get some help making it happen by speaking with an RBC Agriculture account manager. Then, set up an investment plan to make even more of your ideas happen. Visit rbc.com/chartyourcourse and get started today.
Yeah, I can remember I had three paths that I was sort of chasing at the time. I was either going to be working on Wall Street, I was going to be a lawyer, an intellectual property lawyer, or I was thinking about going into academia. So yeah, I'm nowhere near any of those. I get to talk about the market once in a while, but definitely I've visited Wall Street, and that's about the extent of it. So in today's complex world of agribusiness management, and the variables that farmers are dealing with on a daily basis, we talk about it all the time here at Real Agriculture. How do you design and build an education around all of that, like in today's fast pace, to make sure that you're up to speed, right? You're giving the latest and greatest in knowledge and like all of that kind of, like I there's something to that. It's not just like what we taught 25 years ago is what we can apply today in totality. So how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, again, I'm going to go to a this and that model. Maybe that's going to be my refrain here in the interview.
It's okay.
I do think that there is value in that formal part of the education. So for instance, let's take accounting, or better yet, let's take hedging risks. There's not a lot of people who are able to go out and navigate the complicated markets known as futures and options without some kind of understanding of what it means to hedge, what are the risks that you're going to face, what is it, how does it actually happen? So at some level, there's got to be some sort of a technical understanding of, from a business side of it, what does this actually mean? And maybe if finance isn't your game, you can take human resource management. What are the approaches that you can take to motivating a team? How do you hire the right people? How do you motivate them? How do you compensate them? So there's things there that those are always changing, and curriculum needs to keep up with that, because otherwise, you're going to end up with a degree that no one wants. The other side of that is also helping people see how those ideas actually show up in the real world. And that's where I think agriculture and colleges of agriculture are pretty special places, because, yeah, we're embedded in a university, but you know what? Most colleges of agriculture in Canada are connected with provincial ministries of agriculture, in the US with the land grant system. And so they've got a foot inside an academic world where they're thinking about interesting questions to ask and developing new techniques, but also a question outside of academia in agriculture, where the problems are very real. And the magic happens when you can take those ideas, those formalized ideas, and say, here's how this gets applied in the real world. Futures and options are a great example of how you can do that. In a second year course that I used to teach, I made students actually go through an example of, okay, if I'm going to develop a hedging strategy, what's it going to be? And then track that over time. So I didn't actually make them go and do the transactions, but it gives them an opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to commit to doing this. And then what am I going to learn along the way? So I think there's the fundamental knowledge, but then there's also that applicability of that knowledge. And that applicability of that knowledge doesn't have to happen in a classroom. It can happen out of the classroom. And, again, like a lot of other colleges of agriculture here in OAC, we take a lot of pride in our students not letting their education get in the way of their learning. And so they do a lot of things outside of the classroom that help them learn both how those ideas might get applied, how those ideas maybe need to be challenged, and then they can come up with some interesting ideas, but also develop that better sense of what's it like to be 10 years out of an undergraduate program and having those responsibilities, so that they get that experience, or at least that sightline on those experiences, by going into, let's take a dairy club example, going out and touring a bunch of dairy farms to understand how there's different approaches to how people are managing their dairy herd, both from a business side and from a production side. And so making sure that people actually see things in real life really matters a lot. And then also recognizing, don't stop when you're done with your degree. Keep learning, trying to get that sense of a lifelong learner, and thinking about, well, what's the next thing I want to learn, and how am I going to learn it?
Stay curious.
Oh, amen. Yeah.
Stay curious. Yeah. Now, okay, is that practicality? Is that a change? Because at one time it was kind of, maybe I've got my perception's incorrect, but there was a time, I think, where college is practical, universities very theoretical, and not a lot of mixing. But what you just said, it sounds like that the university system has really had to evolve when it comes to some of its education, maybe using more case studies and things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I maybe this is my shameless self-promotion as a college dean, but our college is celebrating 150 years this year. And so I've been looking back at what it was like in OAC in 1874. And, very different degrees. We didn't offer a 4-year degree. It was very much oriented around short courses. What was interesting is that as that curriculum evolved, it wasn't just on the farming techniques and the farming methods, the practical things that you would expect to see in a 2-year college program now. It also included English and history and harder sciences to try to round out that person. And so I think, we've seen that evolution, and we need that evolution for a couple of reasons. Different people are going to be on different paths, and we need to make sure that people have the right path for them that gives them that step once they're done their formal training and their formal education. The complexities of some of the issues that we're dealing with has also grown quite dramatically. I think about plant breeding. And while I'm an agricultural economist, I do talk to plant breeders quite a bit. And it's evolved considerably, especially in the last 10 years, that, yeah, you've got to have that practical approach to how you're going to do it, but you also have to understand those more sophisticated techniques and how those can get applied to help solve increasingly complex problems.
Yeah, very, very fascinating. Now, when we talk about agribusiness education, um, what are some of those things that students are, and as you're talking to maybe alumni as well, what are some of those key things that are being driven home that people are demanding, whether it's in their, the 4-year degree or it's, the executive kind of type programs after the fact, maybe somebody goes back and wants to upgrade some of their skills. What are some of those topics you're hearing a lot about?
So I mean, there's disciplinary topics that you can talk about, whether that's HR, whether that's cost accounting, so you understand your cost of production. Like there's some of those fundamentals that are really important and are always going to be evergreen. But I also think that we're increasingly hearing about this idea of I don't want to necessarily take another 4-year program or another 2-year executive program. I want to get a micro credential. Or what they talk about laddering badges. So you take one short course that gives you a badge, you take 2 or 3 more of those that gives you a micro credential, you take a couple more of those and you get a certificate. And so that I think is one of the things that's going to be exciting to see evolve over time, and how that builds on the experience that people have either in a 2-year college program or in a 4-year university program, so that it gives them sort of that opportunity to continue to maintain their understanding and the relevance of some of those technical issues, but also gives them a chance to try to grow and develop. I think from where I sit right now, a couple things that I keep thinking about and encountering are issues around human resource management, and a big issue that we know is important in all of agriculture, and we see it really squarely here in Southern Ontario, as I'm sure you do in Alberta. It's farm succession planning.
Yeah.
And what can we do to help people understand better that as your farm business enterprise goes, as you go from that owner operator to being the owner manager, that you're not necessarily out on the field all the time. You've hired maybe someone out of a 2-year program to help do some of that, the farm operations from a management point of view. How do you go about doing that? How do you think about, okay, where am I going to go and hire someone? What do I need to start looking for? How do I motivate them? How do I evaluate their performance? You typically, there's job performance evaluations that have to happen. And how do you do that? And this one's a little trickier, but I still think it's really, really important. How do you do that through an intergenerational lens? I think about events that I go to that are college sponsors, and we've got people there from 4 different generations. And what my generation might think of as best practice and approaches to thinking about how you work is going to be different than someone who's older than me and someone who's younger than me. And so recognizing that there's that different perspective that people can take and being open to it. And again, going back to curiosity about understanding that, and then thinking about how that can be leveraged to, work with your team of people to make sure that those ideas that they surface after they've been on the job for a couple of months and saying, well, why do you do it that way? Couldn't you do it this way? And just being open to that, like not always being right. The other piece that I think is really important in this, I mentioned, is farm succession planning. We're on the cusp of seeing some pretty dramatic generational changes, and the Census of Ag tells us, and this is not a new surprise. This has been happening since World War II. As a number of farmers are declining. Those who own the farm aren't always those who operate the farm. And so making sure that there's those conversations that start happening early at the family kitchen table, and recognizing that it is a family business. Most of these farms are family businesses. And okay, as a family business, what do we want to start thinking about in terms of how that transfer of that asset, how that transfer of that farm actually happens, and how that baton passing occurs is going to be really important.
Yeah. You like that phrase, laddering badges. An example of that is a program that you put together with Farm Credit Canada and RBC Royal Bank.
Yeah, RBC and FCC have been great partners with us. So in 2002, we launched what's called Foundations in Agricultural Management. It is an online course. It's a free course. It's designed around 8 modules. Each module is about 20 minutes in length, and it covers everything from business planning to cost of production, to financial statements, to risk management, human resource management, a couple modules on farm succession planning. So we heard from our partners how important this was, and we really put our money where our mouth is. And then our last module is on one that I think everyone in agriculture knows is so important, and that's farmer mental health. So the resilience to withstand some of the challenges that come from agriculture. And so, if someone is interested, they can Google search or use whatever web browser they want. Foundations in Agricultural Management, find our course. You sign up, you learn at your own pace. Each module is about 20 minutes long. There's a little test at the end of each module, so you can graduate to the next module. And once you complete all 8 of those, you get a certificate of completion, indicating that you've gotten through the course. And the course was designed not to replace what you might learn in a class. It's designed really to be a call to action. As the farm business enterprise starts to look different for so many people, whether they're new to farming and maybe they took a lot of production courses, but maybe didn't take enough business courses, or whether they're mid-career and thinking of making a change and trying to grow their enterprise, what do I need to know? And so the course is really there to have that call to action, to go and talk to your banker more, talk to your lawyer some more, talk to your accountant some more, talk to your family, and then also start to develop that network of advisors that can be so important, where you can support one another when times maybe get a little bit rough, or if you got an idea like, I wonder what the person down the road would think about that, and having the courage to go and have that conversation about, I was thinking about doing something different. Here's what it is. What do you think?
I'm curious, when you talk to stakeholders, that could be companies or farmers, employers, and you're talking about curriculum, what do you hear is the biggest skill gap? Is it farm financial literacy? Is it human resource management? Is it risk management? Well, and those are ones that come to the top of my head. What do you hear is the biggest skill gap?
Great question. And it's not necessarily the technical things that you might imagine, like around accounting, like around human resource practice. It's often around those professional skills and those transferable skills, what some people euphemistically call the soft skills. Your presence in a room, your professionalism, how you show up on that first day on the job, the responsibility that you develop, your ability to present on the fly. So some of those more softer skills that are so important and that are woven through different curriculum and show up in different ways. Like, there's a reason why we want to see students get up in front of a class of their peers and make a presentation, is that that's a safe place to do that, rather than doing it in front of an annual general meeting for the first time. And so it's about developing those skills that allow people to have the success to demonstrate the knowledge that they have. That's communication skills, whether there's written or oral, professionalism on things like even how you write an email. All of that are things that we increasingly hear from our stakeholders are so important.
Hey, John, thanks so much for joining us here. This has been an awesome, fun discussion. Really, really appreciate it, and keep up the great work at University of Guelph.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot.
As we wrap up today's enlightening conversation on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, I want to extend a thank you to our guest, John Cranfield from the University of Guelph, for sharing his real and valuable insights and experiences. Today's discussion not only highlighted the critical transition from traditional farm management to the more encompassing concept of agribusiness, but it also emphasized the importance of recognizing farms as complex, evolving businesses, no different than any other industry. This shift in perspective is crucial for adapting to the challenges and opportunities of the modern agricultural landscape and some of the challenges that we have in front of us. For our listeners, especially those that have ties to the University of Guelph, I hope today's episode has sparked a deeper appreciation for the role education and research and outreach has in shaping the future of our industry. The distinctions we've explored between farm management and agribusiness are more than semantics. They're reflective of a broader transformation in how we view and engage with the agricultural sector. If there's anything that Dr. Cranfield said that you want to provide some feedback on, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call that Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank. And until next time, keep on minding your farm business.